You know, you hear all these stories about how H.P. Lovecraft was a very paranoid man. He was scared of a lot of things, and that's how he decided what he was going to write, things that really freaked him out. So to me, it's either he had a really, really bad day at the beach or he had a plate of seafood that really did not agree with him. Hey, what's up, bookworms and deep ones? Are you feeling a little fishy? Good to hear, because today we are going to Innsmouth, Massachusetts to talk Shadow Over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. This is a story that was written in 1931. It was rejected by Weird Tales magazine because it was considered too long. But Mike, it's only 50 pages. How can it be too long? The explanation that I see is that the editor said the story was so good he couldn't find a place to break it up, but it was too long to publish in one issue. So he just didn't publish it. Makes perfect sense, don't it? Well, the thing was, Lovecraft was actually quite critical of it himself. His exact words were, "It had all of the defects that I deplore." So he was not actually a fan of it. But for the first time ever, one of H.P. Lovecraft's stories was actually published as a book. However, it had tons of grammatical errors. The things like falling apart. It was a very limited run, and needless to say, it flopped. It didn't do well. It basically ended up in bargain bins, and it was gone. It was over. A very limited run. Lovecraft himself was very, very displeased with how the publication turned out. So it kind of just vanished until after his death. And then it was in 1942. They went ahead and published it in Weird Tales magazine, like they should have in the first place, and it became the story that we know and is revered today. So there we go, guys. That is actually the story about how this book got published. It's kind of interesting to hear about how Lovecraft did not like it himself. I think we'll have to talk about that when we get into it later. But let's begin by always, as we do, and talk about what is it about. Now, when a man treks into a dark, mysterious village infamous for its terrifying rumors and reports of missing persons, he learns that sometimes truths are far more petrifying than myth. In fact, sometimes truths open doors to completely other worlds. Worlds where men become fish-like creatures, and fish-like creatures yearn for human sacrifices, storming the beach late at night when refused their carnal requests. Now, as the man learns more of the town's history and begins to question his own ancestral being, his descent into madness begins and ends in the ruined town of Innsmouth, Massachusetts, where the creepy crawlies are. Now, I think anyone by now knows that if you got a Lovecraft story, it's going to usually end in tentacles, right? But as per usual, let's do like we always do. Let's get into what makes it good or bad. Now, good, I think what I really sticks out to this is it examines how fragile the human mind can be and how easily it can slip into madness. It questions, can you see something or experience something so horrifying that you actually lose your mind before said thing can actually even harm you? I think that is obviously the biggest takeaway here. I've always said that with him is the fear of the unknown. This, you see it. You see the monsters quite frequently, and they are scary. They are very, very scary. He's very in your face with it. He has a little more action in this than he has in most of his stories, and you get to see from the narrator's perspective how these things can go completely different way than you would usually expect. Now, I think what makes this one kind of stand out from the rest of his stories is how much the lore really is built in this one, how much he builds upon that Cthulhu mythos that we know it as now. And he really just kind of adds into that by getting into the deep ones. Now, we talked last week, or it was 2 weeks ago when I did At the Mountains of Madness, we talked about the old ones. And then for the next one we did was Dunwich Horror, and we talked about the elder ones. Well, what's left, right? This one we got what are known as the deep ones. Now, these are deep ones are ocean-dwelling creatures. They have kind of their own civilization. They've been here for a long, long time. There's supposed to be several. He only mentions one actual civilization by name. It's a word that I cannot pronounce, so I'll urge you to look that up if you want. But he has lots of words that I cannot pronounce. If I tried, it would just be wrong. So you just kind of be like, hey, yeah, that's that one ancient civilization underneath the sea. But he digs into stuff about how like there's a it actually was discovered by our government in like the 20s, and they tried to destroy it, but they failed. All kinds of really gets deep into what these creatures are. But the big thing about these like fishman creatures is that they have a penchant for breeding with humans, and I think that's where they kind of got their human-like features. Because you talk about, you get the inhabitants of this town of Innsmouth, and they're all really weird looking. They walk weird and things like that, and you start noticing things like, maybe that one has gills, So you start seeing little things like that. You start realizing, holy crap, I think this entire town has been compromised. So you got like the whole invasion of the body snatchers kind of thing in there, but not really. It really kind of adds to the paranoia, which is one of the things I think always make his stories great. Think about every Fishman style of creature you've ever seen. Like, for example, that Aquaman movie that came out a couple years ago. You remember all those creatures in the trench? Yeah, that is exactly what they look like, described by Lovecraft. So you got all these really sharp teeth, Fishman creatures. You've seen it a million times, and tons of things have used it. I have to believe this was the influence for a lot of those designs, very Lovecraftian. If you think about the where the Dresden Files books are right now, and I think that was the Fomor is very, very deeply influenced by the Deep Ones. So we also learn a bit more about Dagon in this one. It's actually referenced more in an earlier story. I can't think of the name of which book it was he first showed up in, but with Dagon, you really learn more about his cult, and these are the people who are going to, make sacrifices to Dagon, who basically at first offers them riches for human sacrifices, and then when they go back on that, he decides, okay, how about a nice culling of your town, and let you realize this isn't a choice anymore. You've already commit. So it's a very sometimes I think that a cult is more messed up than the actual bad guy is. And in this, the cult of Dagon is very, very messed up. You see a lot of these people are just scared, they don't know what else to do. And you're wondering how the narrator is able to kind of walk around this town and not be, mobbed by them. Well, that's the big hook of the story there that you'll get into. But I think it just, it has a real eerie ambiance with the way that the narrator interacts with the inhabitants of the town. You know that something's not right here, and it really almost feels like an alien world. What happened here? You're wanting to find out what happened, and you find that out slowly over the course of these 50 pages. But for me, the biggest thing that I would say is good in this book is the ending, and holy hell, this ending is a mind F. It is really, really messed up. I didn't see it coming at all. It completely took me off guard, and I think that this is probably my favorite Lovecraft ending that he ever wrote. It is, a lot of his endings just kind of end, or like I've always said, I joke on these that they always end in tentacles. This one ends in something else, and it's very dark, it's very twisted, but it's really, really thought-provoking, and it's one of those things like when you go back and read it again, you'll see little things that you didn't notice before, and that, to me, is a great, great story. I'm going to put this one as a 6 on my fear factor, because you're not going to stop thinking about this one for a bit, especially because of that ending. It's really going to stick with you. I think it's very much terrifying. Like I said, the creatures are very, very messed up. The idea of these people, what they do for sacrifices and stuff, it's really, really freaky stuff. So it would be kind of hinging between a 6 and a 7 here. But if you're really new to this kind of thing, it might make you squirm a little bit. And anytime you're dealing with fishman creatures like this, it's kind of slimy, right? Let's move on to the bad here. Look, action was not Lovecraft's forte. I don't think it's nearly as bad as he thought. Apparently he thought it was like absolutely just terrible. He just felt like it didn't fit his style. It is kind of jarring because you're not used to that. With his stories, it's always about, setting the tone, the world, the atmosphere, things like that, the ambiance. And with this, it's like, okay, we got actual action scenes. It feels kind of weird. And it's definitely not his style. I don't ever think it's just like atrocious like he did. Obligatory mention of his writing style. I feel like I have to say this every one of them again. If this is the first one of these Lovecraft videos you've watched, I'm going to say that his writing style is not going to be for everyone. This is no different. It's just like all the other stuff that he wrote. His writing style did not change very much during these times here. So while there is a couple of new wrinkles, like I said, with the action and things like that, don't be expecting, well, I couldn't make it through Mountains of Madness because I didn't like the writing style, but I'm going to try Shadow Over Innsmouth. It's going to be kind of the same writing style, even if there are a couple of new wrinkles, but I really don't have a ton of bad to say about this. This is a great, great story. It really is. One of my favorites. Let's get into why you should read it, though, and that is because this is a top 5 Lovecraft story for me. It really is. I talked last week about how Dunwich Horror always seems to be like a lot of people's top 5, but it wouldn't be that for me. In fact, this is my second favorite, right behind The Color Out of Space. I think it's way better than the Cthulhu. It's way better than any of those other big stories you've heard about. I really cannot emphasize enough how much this ending really changed this whole story. So when I read it a second time before I did this review, I was like, oh, okay, I can see what you did here and you did here. You were planting those seeds, you were foreshadowing, and I didn't even know it. And you think, you can't really do that in 50 pages. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. There's a reason why we're still talking about this man 100 years after his death. Because, yeah, this story is just every bit of what you've heard. It is every bit as good as what you've heard. It is as advertised. It is definitely one of his best, and I cannot say enough about why you should read it. Look, it's a hell of a good ending, even if some consider it just too dark. And I have to question, look, you're reading H.P. Lovecraft, the man that is known for giving people nightmares for a century. You should be expecting it to be dark. You should not be expecting happy endings, okay? So if you're going to this, you know, hey, I want a happy ending, I'm not necessarily going to say this is a bad ending. I'm just going to say it's an unexpected ending, and it is very twisted, and it really makes you think just a little bit. But legit scares, incredible world building, and just the imagination on this man to come up with some of the stuff that he did. I think this is definitely one of the key mythos books, for sure. It really does build everything up. Final thoughts here. Like I said, I spoke last week about Dunwich Horror and how I don't think it's one of his favorite. Like I said, Color Out of Space is the only one for me that really is above this, and that's just because, you know, watch that Color Out of Space review where the idea of something otherworldly crashing on our planet and having a different effect on us than, you know, we would expect is something that just really is compelling to me. It's the only reason I even would read Tommyknockers, which, you know, I can't wait until I get to talk about Tommyknockers with you guys, because with this, it feels like the idea of stuff that was already here. And this is what I think is always makes Lovecraft stuff stick with me, is it's stuff that not only is already here, but it was here long before we were, and it's going to be here long after we are. And just how Lovecraft always made it seem like the universe finds us insignificant, and that is the real crux of his stories. We are insignificant in the greater cosmos, and this story really puts its foot on your throat and gets that across. And perhaps it's my own fear of the ocean with this. I wouldn't say like, look, if I saw a fish man crawl out of the ocean, yeah, it'd scare the shit out of me. I'm not saying that. But I don't think to me it's the monsters as much as what lives in the ocean that is scary to me. I have a irrational fear of the ocean. So we'll get into that another time. But yeah, maybe that's why it's just kind of always stuck in my brain all these years. So guys, have you read Shadow Over Innsmouth? What did you think? Do you have a favorite Lovecraft story that I haven't mentioned in Fright Fest? Because this is the last Lovecraft story I'll be covering for a while. I plan on doing more over the life of the channel, I hope. But yeah, for now, that will be all 3 this month. Maybe I'll actually talk about Cthulhu, since that's the one that everyone seems to have the most interest in. But guys, I can't state enough, read Shadow Over Innsmouth if you haven't. I think that you'll find plenty there you like. So drop in the comments, guys, and let me know what you think, and I will talk to you there.